Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Plus podcast. Mining. Contentious issue, wouldn't you say? There's some amazing amount of stories that we've covered on Fully Charged the last 10 years about mining and the news that gets out about various things in the mining industry. And so it was a really good reason to get this week's guest onto the show, because if there's one thing Rohitesh Dhawan knows, it is mining. So he is the CEO of the International Council on Mining and Metals, which is an international organization dedicated to safe, fair and sustainable mining and in the metals industry. And he represents the largest mining companies in the world through that organization: BHP, Glencore, Anglo-American, Rio Tinto, lots of them that the general public have heard of. But what's fascinating about this conversation is he talked about things that we kind of don't think about, and the issues surrounding the mining industry and the future of the mining industry, which is really, really important. Because in order to transition the world away from fossil fuels, we need to use different materials, or more of certain materials we've used a slight amount. And he just comes up with some fab facts. But before we dive in and find out more about the international mining industry, let us have a word from our sponsors, who do use some of the materials that we discussed today in their products, but their products are fantastic. Over to them. My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future. Please welcome on to the Fully Charged Plus podcast, Rohitesh Dhawan. So, Rohitesh, thank you so much for joining us on the Fully Charged Plus podcast. This is really exciting for me because I'm diving into this topic knowing so close to absolutely nothing about how things are dug up. I mean, just to give some background of it, I have operated the biggest hydraulic digger in the UK in a granite quarry in Yorkshire for a TV show. And it was just brilliant. I loved doing it. I exploded a cliff of rock, when they put all the explosives in. I pressed the button and then I moved this huge digger and dug up massive lumps of granite for a TV show, which was great. So that's as close as I've got to understanding quarrying, mining, extracting stuff from the ground. But I just quickly want to go over there was a recent panorama program on the BBC in the UK about cobalt extraction in the DRC, and it was a little bit of a hit piece about Tesla, because it was all the sort of shtick that the journalist did was these poor people are digging up cobalt by hand so that the richest man in the world can get even richer, and people like me, sort of holier than thou green liberals, can drive around in their Teslas. Kind of a couple of other uses of cobalt that I think it might be worth mentioning. So that's become it's sort of risen its head again. But what was interesting about that, I mean, we can maybe discuss that the intricacies of that later, was the big story that broke a few years ago. I was at a conference in Oslo, the electric vehicle conference, and an amazing guy from Amnesty International did a talk about children who were mining, and it was there's no justification. There's no way you can say, oh, well, it's just different people. We can't judge how they live. No, that is just wrong on a global level. Well, what this BBC program revealed is essentially that doesn't happen anymore. If it does, it's on a tiny fraction. That 4,000 children have been taken out of mining and put into schools, are fed by the mining companies who supply the food for the schools so they get something decent to eat, blah, 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 which is great. Because I think if there was any chance for the BBC to really ring the story of children mining, they would have gone for it, and they couldn't find it, and there was no evidence that they could find it. Anyway, that's a very bad introduction to you. Just realised. 2.5 minutes of me waffling, but it's a really hot topic in the electric vehicle community. It's a really hot topic in terms of the debate between, how we transition away from fossil fuel. That's the thing. So the group that you work in, I've looked it up. So it's 20 years old, essentially.
That's right.
And I've now forgotten what it's called, but I'm going to remember. It is the International Council on Mining and Metals.
There you are.
But that is which I hadn't heard of. So it's not widely. I'm going to suggest not widely known by the general public. Clearly, very widely known in the mining industry. But
that's right. So the ICMM, which is the short form of the International Council on Mining and Metals, not very widely known in the general public, but the companies that are members of the ICMM will be very well known. So it's Rio Tinto and Glencore and Vale and Anglo American and the world's largest mining companies that together make up a third of the global mining industry. Now, Robert, the really interesting part of what your introduction, which wasn't a waffle, it was interesting, was that mining is actually a much bigger part of all of our lives than we realize.
Yeah.
And let me say one simple sentence that will make that extremely clear, which is look around wherever you're sitting right now, whether that's outdoors or indoors, and everything that's around you is either grown or it is mined. As simple as that. There is no other way to get materials that we need to live the lives we lead without either growing it or mining it. And then one of my favorite things, if we were physically together, Robert, and if people listening to this were in the room with us, I would ask people to raise their hands if they've ever been to a farm. And I promise you, every time I've done this, almost everybody raises their hands. Because you've been to a farm. You know where food comes from. And then I say, well, raise your hand if you've been to a mine. Crickets.
Yeah. No, because I'd put my hand up, but I know I'm unusual.
And by the way, I hope that when you went on that quarrying adventure, that was all, people knew you were there. You didn't just hijack a truck.
I didn't just climb over the fence and get hold of a huge digger. No, I was allowed. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, the fact is, most of us will never get to encounter a mine in our lives because they're in parts of the world we may not live in. And even when they are there, they're typically far from urban centers. And even if you can get close to one, there's health and safety reasons why you may not want to go down. Yeah. But all that being said, Robert, I think given the world we're heading into, which is a world that will consume ever greater numbers of metals and minerals, because we'll get into this, but a typical electric car takes 6 times the metal inputs as a normal car. A wind turbine takes 9 times as much metal input as a gas-fired power station. Right. So if you converted every petrol and diesel car into an electric car, and you converted every gas-fired power station into a wind farm, you would end up using orders of magnitude greater metals and minerals like copper and lithium and cobalt and things that you discussed. So that's why this conversation is so timely. Because although we are aware of where our food comes from, so far we haven't had to think about where the metals and minerals come from. And given we're going to be consuming a lot more of them in the future, directly or indirectly, this is a great conversation to be having.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that I really want to bring up at the start, because, so when I've just done recorded a podcast, which was sort of a load of news stories. And one of them was, I just Googled children coal mining in Africa. And the results that came back instantly were not good. As in there are children illegally working in exactly the same thing, artisanal coal mines in southern Africa, in quite a few countries in southern Africa. And it's become an issue. But I've never heard of it because the amount of political weight given to the children working in the DRC was huge and got a lot of publicity. I've never heard the fact that there's kids going down mines to dig up coal, and some were killed not that long ago. There was a mine collapse, and some of the victims of the mine collapse were under 10, or are under 12 or something. They were children. It's just a horrific story. And, and the same in, I believe in Pakistan as well, there were some children mining, and that was Amnesty International kind of finding out that, it's not legal. It's not sort of promoted by the government as a good thing. It's illegal, but it's still happening. But so the side of because the way you explained what we need to extract in order to produce renewable energy, in order to drive less polluting vehicles when you're driving them on the road. We've just got to basically dig up half the planet. And I'm reminding myself and our listeners that we've done quite a lot of extraction of coal and oil and gas, which we use once. I think that's all. I mean, it's kind of almost a political point, but I'm having to remind myself what we're transitioning away from isn't easy and benign. It's got some real big downsides. I think that's all. I want to make that
It's a very good point. And there's just two things I would say to that, Robert, that are really worth keeping in mind. The first is we actually do not have to dig up half the earth to get all the metals and minerals we need. And here's why. Because right now, if you were to map of the entire earth, what proportion of it is disturbed by mining? The answer is less than 0.5%.
Wow.
Less than 0.5% of the world's land is disturbed by mining activity. Yet its products support
huge
all of modern life.
In
contrast, something like half of the world's land, something like 50% of the world's land is disturbed by agriculture.
Yeah.
So you just get a sense of the proportion. Now, here's the fact. When we do disturb land in mining, it tends to be really intensive, right? You're potentially going up to 5 kilometers below the earth. Sometimes the footprint can be quite significant on a localized basis. But the reality is that even as we're going to consume more of these minerals, in terms of a proportion of the Earth's land, it's actually relatively small. So that's the first thing to consider. The second thing to consider, and this is to your point, Robert, about the fact that you typically use oil and gas once, you burn it for energy, poof, and then we put the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. With minerals, the beauty is, in many ways, that you can recycle it. You can use it again and again and again. But you can, so for example, something like steel, you can recycle it over and over again, aluminium over and over again, copper over and over again. But before you can recycle it, you need to collect it.
Yeah.
And here's a damning statistic. Lithium, which is so critical to the batteries we use in our laptops and phones and cars, we currently recycle less than 1% of lithium.
Wow.
So, yes, we must think about where all these new metals and minerals are going to come from. And even if you recycled 100% of copper, you would still only meet 60% of the demand for copper we will have in 2030. Right? So there's a massive need to get more of this stuff.
Yeah.
But there's also a massive need to actually collect what we already have, reuse it, so that we're only mining what we absolutely require.
Yeah. I mean, that is so there, in a sense, then the role of your organization is to, from what I can gather, is to minimize the impact of that mining. You know, we've got to do it. And let's burn huge amounts of fossil fuels to do everything. And then, you know, you're going, oh my God, the impact just goes up and up and up, and transporting and all that stuff. But so the idea is then to try and minimize that impact.
Correct. To minimize the downside impacts and maximize the upside. Because remember, mining is a huge source of jobs, a major earner for foreign exchange, massive contributor to community development, a essential kind of development actor in some of the most impoverished parts of the world. So the job of our organization is to bring together 28 of the world's largest mining and metals companies, that's a third of the global industry, to voluntarily find ways of maximizing benefit, minimizing harm. Now that means, Robert, the other way you could do that, of course, is to have government regulation that does that. And for us, government regulation is the floor, not the ceiling. So at the very minimum, all mining needs to respect laws and regulations, at the minimum. But given the power of this industry, its economic power, its ability to make real change happen, we see it as our duty and our responsibility to go beyond the regulation, to take voluntary commitments, to do things that we believe are in the best interest of society. I'll just give you one quick example because it'll give you such a good sense of what we do. For the last nearly 2 decades, we have said that companies that belong to this group will not mine or prospect in a World Heritage Site.
Right.
Now, that's critical because these are sites of extreme natural importance to the world. And we believe some of them should remain protected from any kind of disturbance. Now, in many countries, there's no law prohibiting mining in these sites, but we've said it's so important, we're not going to do it. And we're encouraging others to do the same and just say, look, let's just say that's off bounds. Let's not do it. Yeah. But sadly, government regulation hasn't kept up. So there's a space for us to be voluntarily going much further, but we really hope that governments will also follow and in some cases lead and say, look, this is critical for society. This, like a carbon price. We should have a carbon price. We support that. Yeah. Government should say, let's have a carbon price. And then what we'll get into in a minute, Robert, talking about how that would change vehicles in mine sites, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Because, I mean, I think the other thing I just want to touch on sort of early on in the discussion is which I'm sure you're aware of them, but as a company, we've done quite a lot of work with and interviewed, and they've been on the show, who are called Benchmark Mineral Intelligence in London. And they have been so clear when we've talked to, when we've done podcasts or answered our viewers' questions about, because that's a common theme of anxiety about this transition is we haven't got enough lithium, or we're going to run out of cobalt, or all those things. And it's when you ask those guys, are we going to run out? And they go, no. I mean, that there is enough of the material we need to produce the things that we want to produce in order to try and mitigate the damage we've already done, effectively.
Yes. So in that sense, Robert, the question becomes so interesting when you change just one word. So you might ask the question, which is, how much of the material will we have?
Right.
Just delete the word much.
Right.
How will we get this material?
Right.
That's interesting, huh?
Yes.
Because you may have it all, but if in the process of digging it all up, you end up destroying biodiversity, you drain water sources, you displace people, you cause all sorts of havoc, that's not a good outcome. No. So the answer, the right question isn't, do we have enough of this stuff? Yes, let's ask that question. It's important to ask that question.
Yeah.
But let's ask the question, how are we going to get all of it? And how are we going to do it in a way that's responsible? Because like you were saying earlier, what good is it to the world if we solve the problem of climate change by providing all these metals and minerals that go into renewable energy technologies? But in doing that, we cause a whole bunch of other problems. That would not be a good thing. But just to your point about scarcity, and this can take us into all sorts of directions, geopolitics and economics. But just my favorite anecdote, because I'm sitting here in London, I think you are too, is that here in the UK, we have said that by 2030, all cars sold have to be electric. No more diesel, no more petrol. Now, if you were to convert, let's say it's not 2030, let's say in 2021, we said we want to convert all of the UK's cars to petrol and diesel. We have about 35 million cars here in the UK.
Yeah.
If you did that today, you would need twice the current global production of cobalt just for the UK.
Right. Yeah.
So now imagine if every American and Indian and Chinese person and Russian and Brazilian and African also converted their cars. They definitely wouldn't be enough cobalt today. But there is supply coming on stream. And our reason for existence as an organization is to say that as we produce this stuff, we must maintain the highest standards of responsibility because we may end up getting all of it, but we don't want to get it at just any cost. It must be done in a sustainable, responsible way.
Yeah. And I mean, that is, it's so good. It's such a wonderful thing that you're doing. And it is interesting to see how quite often, I do believe that the world's eyes on, for instance, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and cobalt and children mining. I think I would say that the government there, the mining companies there, without question, sort of went, oops, they've noticed. And it was never a legal thing. It was never like condoned by the mining companies. Always said it's illegal and you mustn't do it. Blah, blah, blah. And there are legitimate mining companies, Chinese and American, and all that. Some of the companies you mentioned that were operating there, but there was this sort of hidden, artisanal. I just think it's terrible because I always think of artisanal bread being made in a nice bakery, in a trendy part of London. I don't think of it as mining coke as a child going down a mine, But it felt like, all I was going to say is it felt like it did change the operation there because clearly that has stopped. Someone has said, let's stop the kids going digging up the stuff and we're not going to support that and will bring it to an end.
Thankfully, everyone said that we're not going to support the illegal stuff. So companies have said, this cannot happen. Governments have said this absolutely should not happen. Right. Donors have said, here's some money to make sure it doesn't happen. Civil society groups have said, we're going to go in and help people to make sure they have alternatives. But Robert, it's really important that we distinguish between two things here. Let's make sure we're always clear.
Yeah.
There is artisanal and small-scale mining, which is legal.
Yes.
Which is done by small-scale operators that are using the opportunity of resources at their disposal to produce things that are perfectly legitimate and done in often very decent ways.
Yeah.
And then there is illegal mining.
Yeah.
Different. So you could have artisanal and small-scale mining, perfectly legal, sustainable, well-operated, not always, but can be done that way. And then there's illegal mining. And illegal mining simply should not happen because illegal mining, whether that's done by adults or in the most tragic cases done by kids, generates a huge amount of negative impacts on the local communities, on the people involved, on the communities in the area. And as a result, that ought to really be clamped down on. But artisanal and small-scale mining, which provides, by the way, you may be surprised to hear this, but about a quarter of all the gold produced in the world is done by artisanal small-scale miners. Yeah. That's extraordinary. You think gold is produced by large mining companies. Yes, it is. But a quarter, if you have 4 pieces of jewelry, there's a chance one of them came from artisanal small-scale mining. Probably not. No, that's not how jewelry is made. Yeah. But you get what I mean. It's a substantial proportion. So illegal stuff absolutely shouldn't be done. Artisanal small-scale, there's a really important role for it if it's regulated and supported properly.
Right. And I mean, at the moment I can't imagine what the sort of, because I think the thing that would boggle the mind of someone from completely outside the mining industry is just the sheer quantities. And I mean, the mines I have seen, and I have had unusual experience as a person from outside the industry in that because I've made weird TV shows about things like open cast coal mines, granite quarrying. Yes. I have sort of been to some of those places. I've had a ride in one of the really enormous mining trucks. That was in Germany with coal. But it's just the scale of it is so enormous. The tonnage, the sheer, because what we end up with is the tiny little bit at the end of it. The metal case on my phone. Well, that was dug up somewhere, that material.
That's right.
By a massive digger, and it was shipped and refined and checked, But what I've ended up with is a tiny little bit of stuff. It's an extraordinary journey, isn't it?
Exactly. And we have to move these very large amounts of the earth to get very tiny concentrations of minerals. Yeah. And in some cases, when we're operating copper mines, for example, today, it can be the ore concentration in the rock is 0.5%.
Wow.
0.5%. So just imagine to get, say,
a ton of copper. Yeah.
How much you're moving, how much earth you're moving. So the result of that is everything happens at a big scale. So, you talked about these mining trucks. It's helpful for somebody who's never been to one of these to just give a sense of the scale. So a truck, right, the world's largest haul trucks that take all this mined stuff that gets dug up out of the ground and take it to where it gets processed, can take in a single load up to 500 tons.
Wow. Oh.
And for anyone who can't imagine 500 tons, the average, and I say this because I'm from South Africa, so I've seen these elephants in real life. I hope others have too. But an average grown elephant is 5 tons.
Right.
So that's 100 elephants. In the back of the truck.
But I mean, the way we could, if you've never seen an elephant up close, if you follow a very big truck on a highway in the UK or in Europe, what are they, 40 tons maybe? So the biggest are around 40 tons. So
it's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a convoy of those trucks in one truck. Yeah,
exactly. And then you think about the sheer size of them. So if you look at the tire of one of these trucks, now I'm not a very tall guy, you probably can't tell this from here, but one of these tires is about 4 meters tall.
Right. Wow.
So imagine, even if you're 2 meters tall, if you're a really tall person, double yourself, and that's the size of the tire of one of these trucks. Now, next time, you stand next to a double-decker bus or a major kind of truck, and it won't be that big. So now to get a sense of just how big these trucks are, that's the scale we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is mind-boggling. I mean, and I've always been fascinated by like large-scale, humongous sort of excavators and diggers and trucks and things from when I was a kid. So whenever I get the chance, we're going to go and film in a quarry. Oh, brilliant! Within the mining community, so that within those industries, this is what none of us are party to outside the industry. And I think we can't, I've not really, until I heard about you and read what you do, I'd not even thought about it. There's large groups of people who work in mining who sit down with each other and say, how do we extract this much copper, get it here, put it on a train when it is copper, get it shipped to wherever it's got to be used with the minimum impact, and I would imagine there's economic benefits to that. It's not just, they're not going to be tree hugging, they run huge mining industry, but, how do you do that economically would be presumably a very key part of it.
It is, because think about it. If you use less energy in producing this stuff, it generates less greenhouse gas emissions, which means you don't contribute to the problem of climate change. That is unequivocally a good thing for the planet. It's what we should be doing. All of us should be doing that. And it just so happens that when you use less energy, it costs you less money to dig up the stuff. Now, in an industry that is cyclical, right? Commodity prices tend to go up and they tend to go down. We've just been through a period of high commodity prices coming out of COVID as economies have stimulated back to life. At some point in the future, surely they will go back down. That's just the way the world works. So as you're doing that, if you can build an operation that uses less energy, that uses less water, that provides employment to local people, that treats people well, that has a good relationship with the government, that protects nature and biodiversity, all of those things make you a more resilient, a healthier, a better contributor to society. That's a good thing. So in our industry, more than any others, Robert, it is the alignment between doing what's right for the world and doing what's right for your business is so strong. And that has been why we have gathered for the last 20 years around the same table as 28 companies who compete in every other aspect.
Right.
But on this issue, we believe it is too important to let it be competitive. Right. On this issue, we put the competitive concerns aside and we say, let's get together and make joint commitments and do the things that are going to make our industry a force for good and try and minimize. Because there's so much we can learn from each other. Think about health, just one thing, health and safety, right? That it is a complete tragedy that even in the last year, in 2020, 44 people lost their lives working in mines that belong to the 28 companies. That's 44 too many.
Yeah.
But it's way down from 10 or 15 years ago. And one of the reasons it's way down from 10 or 15 years ago is because everybody was willing to share, here's what happened. Here's tragically how somebody lost their lives or they got hurt at work. Let me tell you why and how that happened so that you can prevent it from happening in your own business. Now, Robert, is there a competitive advantage to being the company that has the fewest number of fatalities? Of course there is. Of course there is. But has that let people stand in the way of not sharing information? No, it hasn't. And it never should. Never should we let competitive concerns get in the way of doing the right thing. And on all of these issues we've just been talking about, the right thing means finding a way to minimize harm, maximize benefit.
Right. Because, I mean, the other thing I think that is interesting is how the demand for minerals, for just for the material we dig up, let's keep it as broad as possible, has shifted. Because, when a lot of this is happening less and less now, but there was certainly a time when I would be the recipient of a lot of volatile criticism because people who love petrol cars were desperately searching for a reason why, I know this stuff comes out the exhaust, but what about this? What about this? There was a huge amount of that. But what I kept on thinking is, there is copper is used in internal combustion engines. I mean, there's a starter motor, there's the wiring loom. It's not like we didn't used to dig up copper or cobalt, which is used in oil refining, which very few people know. I'd worked on a TV show about an oil refinery, and I don't remember being told, this is the cobalt we use to remove sulfur from diesel and petrol. But there is quite a lot of cobalt used. That's and so what I suppose the gist of my question is, has it and is it changing the actual types of material that are expanding? I mean, presumably there is more of certain types of material being dug up now to make batteries than there was 20 years ago. I'm assuming.
It's a good assumption. And actually, the person or the people who may have said those things to you, I hope they sent it by carrier pigeon and not by phone, because of course.
They made a comment. They would be, two things. One would be critical about us talking about cars in China, because why are you supporting China? They say on a machine that will have been made in China, and they're wearing a T-shirt made in China, and they're using a laptop that uses the materials that they're being critical about. But yes, we'll move on.
Exactly. Yeah. So to your point about are the patterns of demand shifting? Yes, they are. So take this category that we call rare earths. These are these metals and minerals that go into making electronic devices, and they go into making electric vehicle batteries and things for equipment. Now, you would think that we've been talking so much about cobalt and lithium and these rare earths into the electric vehicle supply chain. In fact, at the moment, 3/4 of the world's demand for these metals and minerals comes not from batteries, not from vehicles, not from industrial equipment. It comes from the laptop that I'm speaking to you from now and the iPhone that's on my desk. So consumer electronics today account for a significantly greater portion of demand for these metals and minerals than do any of the applications we've just been talking about. So this means that for the last 20 and 30 years, we've been happily consuming iPads and iPhones and laptops and other things. This has all been happening. We just didn't need to think about it. But suddenly we're having to think about it more, because in addition to all of that demand, which doesn't show any signs of slowing, right? It's not like we're consuming fewer electronics today. We're adding on top of that another layer of demand from electrification and from renewable energy technology.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I suppose that's the thing. When you look at a phone, you go, well, that hasn't got much in it. And one phone hasn't. But, then 2 weeks later, Apple proudly say we've sold 2 billion iPhones. And if you piled up 2 billion iPhones in your front room, it's just a mind-boggling number of them that we have. But, and a lot of them are thrown away, sadly. And that's a terrible travesty.
It is, exactly. And so, Robert, it's funny you mentioned Apple, because actually there's something I want to share that is just so interesting about how the global economy works. So now we've established that Apple could not do what it does without mines and minerals. They're like essential. The phone has about 70 minerals in it. 70, not 17.
Wow.
70. So 70 different minerals go into the phone. Now, there are about 2,000 listed mining companies in the world. Remember I said our group accounts for 28? There are about 2,000 listed mining companies in the world. If you took the market cap of all 2,000, it would be less than the market cap of Apple.
Yes, which is crazy.
Isn't that mind-blowing?
Yeah.
The whole industry, basically, that provides the metals and minerals that go into making electronic products, the market cap of all of that is less than the market cap of a single company. And it just gives you a sense of how wonky and lopsided the global economy has become between the producers of essential commodities and those that are able to market and commoditize them.
Yeah. It is. I mean, and we should explain other mobile phone manufacturers are available. We've sort of picked on Apple. I think Samsung make a few phones, I've heard. Just a couple of billion here and there. But that side of it is a fascinating thing. But then, so I see, and I absolutely get that analogy that there's this extra layer. We're already doing a huge amount to make all the consumer electronics, and then we're adding on to the top of that. We're not replacing it. It's not like, we're now making Rivian pickup trucks. Let's stop making iPhones. That isn't happening.
No, that's right. And then, of course, I mean, so far we've been talking about a particular category of metals that go into electric type applications. Let's not forget that a very big portion of the mining industry actually goes to make the roof over your head. And you might think, why is that? How does that work? Well, the way it works, of course, is that we all use steel to construct the buildings we live in, and everything is made out of steel. Now, how is steel made? Well, actually, the most important ingredient to make steel is iron ore. Iron ore is combined with other ingredients to make the steel that we all use. Now, as people in my home continent of Africa urbanize and live in houses that they didn't live in before, and people move to cities, we're going to be consuming a lot more of that stuff too. So the basic, literally the bricks and mortar of all of our lives are based on the products of mining and metals. And yes, a portion of it is about the cars we drive and the electronics we use, but a lot of it is actually just basic life. And if anybody's listening to this from the United States, let me tell you that you and your colleagues in the United States, over the course of your lives, will consume somewhere in the region of 1,300 tons of metals and minerals over the course of your life.
Wow.
Now, remember what I said about the African elephant weighing about 5 tons? 1,300 tons, because that's how much it takes to power our daily modern lives. Now, that may be different around the world. It just gives you a sense of how much of life depends on this stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, because that's a thing I've not really thought about, because I originally grew up in an area of Northamptonshire where there was iron ore mining going on when I was a kid. I don't think it does anymore. Around Corby, that sort of in that area of the UK, there were big open cast iron ore mines, and there was steelworks at Corby. So, it was used locally. And I loved it because the big diggers then that they used were amazing. I think they were called walking drag lines. They were drag line diggers, and they didn't have tracks. They were huge things. I mean, I can't imagine what made them work. I'm guessing it was diesel engines, but it was in the early 60s. But they could walk along. They had some weird feet that did something like that, and they're actually like walking monsters. And we used to cycle up to see them and get like, oh, they were huge. They were so exciting. Yes. But then I'm assuming then because we know that however you think of all the materials we use, that I'm assuming that is the bulk. That in terms of tons, the largest amount of stuff we dig up and refine, I'm assuming, is those are metals like that.
That's right. Yeah. So iron ore, just the sheer amount of iron ore that the world consumes means that is a very big portion of global mining activity. Right. Until now, and there's a declining portion of it, but it's still massive, is also coal, like the coal operation that you saw. Although, hopefully there are not many which have children working in them. But, we dig up enormous amounts of coal, which can be done by going underground, or what's called open cast mining, which is you can get coal just from the surface, as you just described the iron ore operation. So yes, iron ore, thermal coal, which is the coal that goes into power stations for power, which is different to metallurgical coal. Metallurgical coal is also known as steel-making coal, and that is the coal that you use to combine with iron ore to produce steel. So very different. Right. So when people say we must reduce coal in power stations, absolutely, that is the main cause of climate change. But metallurgical coal, when combined with iron ore in the right conditions, produces steel, but it also produces greenhouse gases. So producing these metals is indeed the large proportion of global mining activity. And then there's precious metals, by the way, which we haven't talked about, but that's gold and platinum and palladium and other precious metals, diamonds.
Yeah. Because I always want to, the other argument that I will be faced with every now and then is you and your precious batteries. The future is obviously hydrogen. And there's there's no way, well, hang on a minute, because, I've looked at a hydrogen fuel cell, I've driven a hydrogen fuel cell car. There's one or two elements that are vital in a lightweight, small, compact hydrogen fuel cell that are kind of not that common. It's not sawdust and a bit of iron. It is platinum. Well, platinum was the one I remember most clearly, which I believe is a fairly rare and fairly expensive metal.
It is, yes. The group of platinum group metals, PGMs, are found in only a few places on Earth. South Africa is a major producer. Russia is a major producer of these platinum group metals. And they have been used, and they are used, in the internal combustion engine, primarily in the catalytic converter. And, of course, the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle also uses these commodities. So, yes, to the extent, and by the way, your previous podcasts on hydrogen versus batteries, I love them. I love the way you paint the picture and how the dichotomy is just maddening. Of course, it's both, and let's just accept that.
Yes, of course it is.
And let's not create this false dichotomy. But it's interesting because that idea that it has to be both is so true in the mining industry too. And we haven't talked about trucks, so let me tell you a little bit about the mining trucks as well. So there's about 28,000 large mining trucks in operation globally. Right. So the fleet of mining trucks globally, about 28,000. They consume together so much diesel, because most of them are run on diesel. You're correct. Yeah. The one you probably saw was run on diesel.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Produce about 68 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions every single year.
Right.
That's big enough to be a country. I mean, that's a lot of emissions coming from just these massive trucks that need to use diesel. Now, why do they need to use diesel? Because remember I said they move 500 tons of payload, up to 500 tons of payload at a time. So if somebody drives a diesel car, what do you think you get? How much diesel do you think you use driving 100 kilometers? I don't know. If it's super efficient, maybe 5 liters, 7 liters. These trucks use 1,300 liters of diesel to move 100 kilometers.
Wow. Right. Okay.
Isn't that crazy? So when next time you feel bad that your car's not very fuel efficient, remember that. It's 1,300 liters to move 100 kilometers. So decarbonizing that becomes absolutely essential. Right. So less than 0.5% of the 28,000 I told you about are currently powered by batteries. The vast majority are diesel. So in the future, we're going to have to move to batteries and or hydrogen to replace diesel. And we have spent the last 3 years, Robert, just working on trying to crack this problem of trying to accelerate the deployment of battery and hydrogen technology to replace diesel. I can tell you all about what we've been doing, but the kind of upshot of it is that it is really hard. It is much harder to decarbonize a 500-ton truck than it is to even decarbonize some of the trucks that you've covered. I mean, your last podcast with Volvo was so interesting.
Fascinating.
Wasn't it? These large trucks that are being decarbonized through battery and hydrogen technology, it takes it to a completely different level when you think about it for mines. And the one really exciting development is one of our members, Anglo American, will be rolling out the very first and largest fuel cell electric truck, so a combination, in the first quarter of 2022. So it's really important, and it's a retrofitted truck, but it's a really important development because it's now getting these large machines into operation. We'll see how it goes, and then it'll be rolled out more broadly.
Because that is such a vitally important thing, and I definitely want to keep in touch with you to find out if we can ever go and see them or whatever, all that stuff. Yes. But the one story that we are hoping to go and see, which is absolutely an anomaly in mining, I'm sure, is I'm sure you're aware of it. The one in Switzerland. So there is an electric mining truck in Switzerland, but it goes up a mountain to get filled up, and then it comes down to unload, which I would imagine, generally speaking, in open cast mining is quite unusual. You normally go down into the hole and then you drag it up. So, but that is an extraordinary story that truck effectively generates more electricity than it uses because when it comes down, it's regenerating, recharging its batteries, all that stuff. I mean, but that is, it's kind of almost a pointless example because, it's so unusual that there's a mine high up a mountain and you take the stuff down. I'm guessing that's not common.
But anytime you have a slope, you could do that. And typically you have a slope in a mine that's kind of 10 degrees, 8 degrees, 13 degrees. We're talking that kind of slope. So when you have a slope and you have a vehicle going down the slope, you can use regenerative braking to then charge the battery back up. So that's a very interesting one. The other one you have to go see. You have to go see this. Is in Sweden. Because in Sweden, what you have is currently about 700 meters, but it's going to be expanded to about 3 kilometers of trolley assist. What do I mean by trolley assist? Trolley assist basically means you run the truck like a tram.
Right.
Trams in European cities, which have
with the overhead.
Correct. So up to 80% of diesel that's consumed in a truck is when it's going uphill. Now, when it's going uphill, you can use the trolley assist system to power it with electricity, you save a significant portion of the diesel use. So that might well be the interim step between a diesel truck and a fully electric or hydrogen one, because you can use trolley assist to then allow you to significantly reduce the energy consumption. So that's a stone's throw away from Switzerland.
Yeah,
really. So
I want to go.
You have to go see this one.
But also that is... Because, I know there's been experiments, I believe, in Germany of putting overhead cables over autobahns, over the freeways.
Yes.
Which is, hugely complex, massive civil engineering job, has loads of safety concerns because other people are using it and how many trucks. But whereas if you do it in a mine, it's no one else is operating in there. You put it in, it doesn't It doesn't have to meet the same sort of standards. One, I would assume it's a temporary fitting for that.
Exactly.
That
so this company that's doing it, Boliden, is kind of in many ways kind of paving new ground, because you're able to show that by doing this, you can significantly reduce energy consumption, and you don't need to retrofit the whole thing. Because, of course, imagine that you have, as I say, this massive fleet of diesel trucks, and suddenly you need to go all electric, or you're going to use hydrogen. That's a complete redesign of the entire mine. It's not just take this diesel truck and put an electric one. How are you going to charge the thing? How does it change the way you schedule these trucks? Because remember, this is the other thing people may not realize. Mines operate 24 hours a day, every day. Right. So it's not like you can say, oh yeah, I'll just park that truck.
Or charge it at night. No, I want to use it.
You can't do that. So that's why you have all these other technologies.
Yeah. But then I'm assuming that your organization isn't as involved in the processing of this material. It's mainly about extraction. I mean, do you cover sort of the transportation from the mine to where it will be processed? Is that part of the discussions you have?
Yes, it is, because in the task of taking all this material and moving it to a process, which may be, well, it's typically by ship, right? So you would put all this stuff in some parts of the world, like Australia, you put it on a ship, and then it would move offshore, either to be sold as an end product or to get processed, or in other cases it might be on a train, or you might even haul it by road. But essentially, for several of these mining companies, they also have processing operations. So you might mine the copper, you might then process it into its end product. You might mine the nickel, process it into its end product. Sometimes those two activities are separated. Different companies do them. Sometimes they're integrated. But ultimately, right, if we care about, and which is what we do, if we care about the net impact of a commodity on the world, then we can't just look at it within what's in my boundary. I mine the stuff, so all I'm going to care about is how I do it. And you, processor, you figure out how you're going to use your own impact. Because that's what leads us to leave opportunities on the table to find ways to reduce the impact across its life cycle. I'll just give you one example. If you mine iron ore, you use some energy to produce iron ore, to dig it out of the ground and to process it. But the vast majority, greater than 90% in many cases, of the emissions from iron ore come not from mining, but they come from processing it and making it into steel. So if the iron ore miners just said, it's got nothing to do with me, I mine the stuff, up to you, that would legally probably be right, but we don't think that's the right way to operate. For us, it's saying, right, let's sit down with the companies that buy our steel and to work with them to find a way to remove emissions from the entire life cycle. Because we may not be accountable for those emissions, but we are responsible. There's a difference. It's not our accountability, but it is our responsibility, because we have the ability to make a difference.
Yeah. And I mean, on that, it eventually becomes to the point where we're all responsible. Unless you can live in a cave wearing, I don't know, I'm just trying to think, wearing sort of hand-beaten leaves that you've turned into clothes. And you only eat. I actually met a wonderful hippie in California who spent a year where he only ate fruit that had fallen from trees. He had the advantage of his father owned a huge fruit farm, so he wasn't like. He was allowed, and he got really, really ill. But he was like trying to live with like zero impact. He was sort of semi-naked, and if a pear fell off a tree, he'd eat that, but he wouldn't pick it.
Yes. Well, that's really problematic for things that grow underground. Then,
I think a certain amount of. I think he was prepared to burn some herbal products while he was. So I think there was a certain amount of insanity involved, but he was very funny. But that because I think we had to wind up in a bit. But that, I mean, are you in the broadest sense of the word optimistic about the future of the mining industry? Do you think we can improve it? That is in process. It does sound like it's being sorted in a way.
Yes, I'm really optimistic, because when I look at what the world will look like in the next 30 years, it looks like a world that, for it to be fair, for it to be just, for it to be sustainable, this industry has to be absolutely at the center of it. Because we're able to provide the products that will make a life like that possible. And in the process of providing those products, we can do it in a way that can lift people out of poverty, which in many cases where mining happens, there also happens to be a lot of poverty. And what we've seen, the reason I'm optimistic is because when we look back 25 years, what the data seems to tell us is that countries with a mining industry tend to do better on things like education, health, and human development indicators than countries without a mining industry. Right. So that's interesting, right? If we do it well, you can actually achieve better outcomes through the industry than if you didn't have the industry. And here's where it gets really interesting. Even within countries, parts of that country that have mining tend to do better on these indicators than parts that don't.
Right.
So it tells me, and there are wonderful examples, because in this piece of work, which is on the website, in countries like Indonesia, Botswana, Chile, they have managed to achieve significant progress really off the back of their mining industry compared to their peers who didn't have that. So it tells me that we, through this industry, have an incredible opportunity to make a positive impact on the world when we know that so many of these challenges remain unfulfilled. And COVID over the last 2 years has pushed a lot of that progress we had made. A lot of those people are in a worse situation today than they were 2 years ago, whether that's on hunger, that's on poverty, that's on educational outcomes, on gender equality. And that then means that both the opportunity and the responsibility for our sector to turn that around, to make a real difference, is even greater. And as it happens, what we produce is going to be so important to the world that commercially, I know there's a bright future for the industry. Right. And what I'm driven by is that as we do supply that and make money as an industry, we absolutely achieve a positive impact on the world. Right.
Sorry. That's very annoying. We'll edit that phone call out. Yes. I thought I'd turn my phone off. I was so unprofessional. But the observation I want to make, and you may correct me and I may not be right, but when you look at where the oil industry has flourished in countries around the world, it's quite interesting that there has been a lot of corruption and political violence and political instability. I mean, there's a very good example because I met someone from Costa Rica not long ago, which doesn't have any oil. It's a very stable society, has just regardless of anything else, a very stable society, has done an enormous amount of rewilding of its jungles and everything. And next door, and I can't remember who it is, has got a lot of oil, and there's been endless military coups, corruption, politicians going to prison for backhanders, bribery, just the society. It's almost like cocaine and oil mess countries up, and quarrying, mining minerals. You can't really smuggle a load of iron ore in some suitcases into Florida. I'd quite like to try. I'm going to land on the beach of Florida in a really powerful speedboat with some iron ore that I'm going to sell on the streets. But do you know what I mean? It's kind of interesting that I don't know why that is, but the history of the oil industry is quite disturbing when you read it. And I'm going back to like 1900. The Henry Detterding, who was really the founder of Shell, he was quite close to being a criminal. I mean, I don't want to accuse him or his family. I actually know one of his descendants, so I'm being a bit diplomatic. But, he did some really bad stuff. There's no question of it. And somehow I have not read those stories about the mining industry. I mean, I know there have been a lot of negative press around, Glencore and Rio Tinto. I can remember that from probably the 60s and 70s. There were scandals and stuff. But it just doesn't seem to have had the same negative impacts on the societies they work in. I might be wrong. I don't know. But, whereas oil, definitely, you can clearly map it in not across the board, but it definitely has at times been a very negative influence on a country.
You know what, Robert? As much as I would love to tell you that the mining industry's record is much cleaner, the sad reality is it's not. And if I was to pretend like it is, anybody listening to this would tell me I'm either mad or just totally dishonest. Because in reality, mining's done some really bad stuff. We really have over the last 100 years. And the most basic facts of that is that people die when they mine. Largely in oil and gas, people don't die when they operate. And so we really got to fix this. That is the most urgent priority, is to make sure that everybody who goes to work in the morning in a mine can be guaranteed that they're going to come home. Maybe guaranteed is too strong a word, because the very nature of mining means that risk is inherent. And just think about these trucks. The second largest cause of fatalities in mines in any given year tends to be people who interact with trucks.
Right.
And that's not a good thing. So we've got to fix that problem, for example. But beyond that, mining has indeed been mired in corruption. Mining has had issues around people who have been relocated from their lands not being done the right way. Pollution's been a problem in mining areas. So all of that has been true for the mining industry as much as arguably it's been for oil and gas. But together with that, there's also come a huge amount of good in many parts of the world. Employment, local development, support for national priorities. Think about countries where the mining industry has been the reason why the industrial complex exists. Think about South Africa, for example. The mining industry is so critical to the local economy. Really problematic in some of the past stuff, but really good on the others. Botswana, for anybody who may not know about Botswana, but has watched the movie Black Panther, basically think about Botswana like you think about Wakanda. Botswana is Wakanda. That's the best way I can explain to people in relative terms. Now, the Botswanans will tell me, don't be silly. There are things that we haven't gotten right. Of course, there are things you haven't gotten right. But the fact is that you have success stories of countries that have used their mineral resources as a major source of growth and development. And what I hope is if we sit down again in 5 years or 10 years, or hopefully sooner than that, but in 5 or 10 years, we can look back and say there are even more of those countries that have been able to use mineral development or mineral resources for development, and we've done it in a way that stayed within planetary boundaries as well.
You're right. That is extremely encouraging to hear, and I just want to thank you because it's just such really an unknown area for so many people that you've shone a light on it in a really positive way, and it's kind of encouraging to know that. And it's not, I know you absolutely haven't painted a sort of 100% rosy picture. There's a lot of challenges involved in what we're going to do in the future, but definitely please come back and tell us as things develop, and do keep in touch about the hydrogen, the 500-ton hydrogen truck. I've got to go and see that.
Well, that's actually only 150. I say only.
Oh, is that right? Only 150 tons. Oh, it's a tissue one.
Exactly. No, so it has been such a pleasure. I'm a huge fan. Love the work you're doing. Would love to come back, and would love to show you some of these sites as well.
No, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, it was a huge privilege to talk to Rohitesh. I mean, I'm desperately keen to get him back on the podcast. It's one of those dreams I have, and I think we're going to push towards doing that next year, is to do episodes where we have like a small panel of people that just know stuff, and we go through news stories. Don't necessarily talk about one particular topic, but Rohitesh obviously would be a brilliant guest on one of those episodes, and also maybe on Fully Charged Live. I think he'd be a very interesting person to have on a panel there, or to do a talk there on those sort of things. So it was a great privilege to meet him. Real joy. Please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Plus podcast. As you can see, we have amazing people on this show, and we've got some really, really extraordinary people lined up for the coming months. But that's it. Maybe subscribe, maybe tell your friends. Do all those things. You can leave us a 5-star review if you are on your podcasting download application, if you wish to do so. And also, as you know, we're on YouTube. You can give us a little like. I don't really ask for those things very much, but that's it. I'm going to have to go because that was a text from my lovely wife. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.